Dorothy Day. You've got a social activist, a devout Catholic convert, a pacifist, and a lifelong socialist who was jailed more times than she could even count. So, how on earth do you make sense of a life that seems to be filled with so many contradictions? Well, one source we're looking at offers a really fascinating and, yeah, pretty unconventional way to view her life's mission. It looks to the patterns of the cosmos for answers. So let's dive in and see what it has to say.
And, she kind of gave us the first clue herself with this famous quote, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed so easily." She was basically telling us that she knew her life was this complex battle, and she didn't want history to just smooth over all the rough edges. This refusal to be put in a simple box, that's the core puzzle we're trying to figure out.
And what a complex battle it was, really. I mean, on one hand, you have a deeply devout Catholic, but on the other, a lifelong socialist, and trust me, the church was not a fan of that position. She was this gentle pacifist who created hospitality houses for the poor, but she was also a fierce activist who got arrested over and over again for protesting things like nuclear air raid drills.
So it all begs the question, right? What single powerful force could possibly fuel a life lived at such extremes? How could one person hold both the humble, quiet servant and the absolute, unyielding revolutionary inside them at the same time?
Well, the source we're examining proposes an answer, but it's probably not one you'd find in your average history book. It argues that the blueprint for her entire life, the very code of her mission, was imprinted at the exact moment and in the exact location she was born. And to decode it, the analysis uses two very specific tools.
So on the left, you've got her natal chart. The source uses this as a map of her personality, that's the who. And on the right, you see this thing called an astrocartography map of the world. That's used to analyze the power of geography in her life, the where. Let's start with the who. Okay, so the first big clue the source points to is this rare and incredibly powerful fusion of two archetypal energies that it claims to find her entire identity. So you have these two forces, represented by the planets Neptune and Pluto. Now, according to this framework, Neptune embodies the archetype of the saint. Think divine compassion, mystical vision, self-sacrifice. And then you have Pluto. Pluto is the revolutionary. It's the force of radical transformation, the one that confronts power, decay, and the absolute darkest parts of society. Two very, very different energies. So here's where it gets wild. The source points out something pretty extraordinary in her chart. At the very moment she was born, these two planets, Neptune and Pluto, were fused together. And not just anywhere. They were on what's called the ascendant, which is basically the part of the chart that represents your public identity, how you show up in the world. So in essence, her public persona was this fusion, the saintly revolutionary.
And this is the cool part, because it connects right back to her own words. The source notes that Dorothy Day herself described her biggest internal conflict as a struggle between flesh and spirit. And that lines up perfectly with the source's interpretation of this cosmic battle between Pluto's raw, earthy power and Neptune's transcendent spiritual ideals.
Okay, so that's the identity, this saintly revolutionary. But how did that actually play out? How did she put those convictions into practice, day in and day out, in the messy real world?
To really get her work ethic, we can just look at one of her favorite quotes from Dostoevsky. "Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams." Her brand of compassion, it wasn't some abstract idea. It was gritty, it was hands-on, and it was often just incredibly difficult. The source finds the engine for this love in action in another key part of her chart, something called a Scorpio stellium. Now don't worry, that's just a technical term for a powerful cluster of several planets all grouped together in one sign. In her case, it was the intense, resilient sign of Scorpio. And just look where this cluster of planets is located. The source highlights that her Sun, which is her core identity, Mercury, her communication, Mars, her drive, and Uranus, the planet of radical change, they were all packed together in the part of the chart that governs daily work and service. This, the source argues, is what gave her that relentless, warrior-like courage to just dive headfirst into the most difficult conditions imaginable: poverty, hunger, social decay, and just get to work. So we have the identity and we have the engine for action. But the source adds one final and honestly crucial layer to its analysis. It argues that where she lived was just as important as who she was. Let's go back to that map and see how this all connects.
Right, so this is her astrocartography map. The easiest way to think of it is as a geographic map of influence. Each one of those lines represents a place on Earth where a specific planetary energy from her birth chart would be the most powerfully expressed for her.
Now, this is where the source points to a truly remarkable detail on this map. I mean, look, there are lines all over the globe, right? But there's only one major planetary line that crosses the entire United States. Just one.
And can you guess which line it is? Yep, it's the Neptune-Pluto line. The exact same saintly revolutionary energy that defined her identity. And that line runs directly, and I mean directly, through New York City, the very place she was born and where she founded the Catholic Worker and did almost all of her life's work. The source is arguing she didn't just have this energy inside her. She lived and worked quite literally on its geographic focal point.
So let's put all the pieces of this unique puzzle together and see the whole picture that the source is painting for us.
So, according to the source, it all comes together in this three-step framework. First, that rare Neptune-Pluto fusion created her core identity as the saintly revolutionary. Second, a powerful Scorpio stellium gave her the tireless, real-world drive to actually live out that mission. And third, she just happened to live and work in the one place in the entire country, New York City, that geographically amplified that core mission to its maximum potential.
And look, it's really important to say that the source presents this analysis not to try and prove a belief system. It's more like a symbolic language, a unique framework for decoding the incredible commitment and consistency of a life that, on the surface, just seemed full of contradictions.
Which kind of leads us with a final thought to chew on. Whether we use politics, or psychology, or even a celestial map, the tools we choose to analyze a life, well, they inevitably shape the story we end up telling. So what does it say about us and about the people we admire that we're so often searching for some kind of hidden blueprint behind a great life?